feel rather disgusted," said a dark-haired girl in a brilliant green dress, one of a party of 4 having supper in the corner of a narrow, crowded restaurant. "I've nearly finished eating, and now I see there's an eyelash on the edge of my plate." The young man beside her leaned over and examined the plate. "There's a chance, isn't there, that it might be your own," he said. "In fact, more than a chance, by far the most likely thing." "I don't see that," said the girl. "Look where it is, stuck right up in the rim. Must have been there for a long time. Anyway, all lashes are much the same, aren't they?" "Are they? Surely you're wrong. Or why would one person feel the need to put on mascara and not another? There are obviously lighter lashes and darker ones, though dark ones are the ideal, of course. What colour would you say this one was, Olive? If it's very dark, there's a good chance it belongs to you." "Oh, don't speak about it. I tell you I'm disgusted. I don't want to spend the rest of the meal examining it. Of course it must be a cook's eyelash, or perhaps the waiter's." "It's a peculiar thing," said the young man, "that anything belonging to oneself should seem so much less disgusting than anything belonging to somebody else. After all, every eyelash has more or less the same function. Yet if you could prove this was your own, you'd feel relieved at once. You might even rather admire it." The other young man was now leaning across the table, but the girl on his right, a blonde with doleful eyes and sparkling eyelids, leant further back in her chair and looked about the room with a heavy sigh. "Olive is lucky it's only an eyelash," said this young man. "Now, a hair is different. A hair is really disgusting. It can be any length and any colour, straight or curled, animal or human. There's something loathsomely ambiguous about a hair." "I admit the fact that it can come in so many varieties gives it a peculiar unpleasantness," his friend went on. "All the same, what I was saying applies there, too. If she were to find one of her own hairs, it wouldn't appear loathsome in the least. Tell me this now. When you find a strange hair anywhere, do you at once connect it with some imagined person? From one hair, do you see in a flash a complete human being with all the details?" "I see nothing," said the girl in green, though the question had not been addressed to her. "I'm always so disgusted, I see absolutely nothing. My imagination doesn't work at all. I'm paralysed with disgust." "Oh, please, haven't we finished with hairs and eyelashes on plates? I'm talking about a hair you would find, say, on a cushion in a strange room. Well, there'd be nothing out of the ordinary about finding that, would there?" "All the same, I should never think of actually picking it up," said the girl. The young man turned away impatiently and again addressed himself to his friend on the opposite side. "What I wanted to know was simply if, seeing a certain hair, you immediately thought, let us say, of a girl with straight brown hair. Rather plain, perhaps, rather silent. Or, on the other hand, with a single wavy hair, do you conjure up a fair, curly-haired girl, very gay, very friendly, blue-eyed, perhaps?" The blonde, who had been tipping her chair back at an alarming angle, let it down suddenly and began to giggle. But the young man who had been addressed stared before him with a serious, almost a stern expression. He had taken off his horn-rimmed glasses, and now he laid them on the table between himself and the girl, and watched sharply until she had removed her elbow from their vicinity. "I must admit I haven't got that sort of temperament," he said. "I seldom take these great jumps from one thing to another. When I look at any object, I'm content to contemplate it as it is. If it's a hair, for example, I'd be able to describe exactly what that hair was like, its length and colour, the curve it took in the air. But I would say nothing, never even venture a guess as to the sort of person it belonged to. That wouldn't interest me, I must say. The things that go on behind the scenes in some of these kitchens," the girl in green was muttering. "I believe if one could get a look, just a glimpse through one of those swing doors, one would never eat out again, and that goes for even the best of them. "Don't worry," said the young man. "Never occurred to me that I was taking you to the best. It does happen to be the newest, however. That's the only reason I suggested it." "And I know that it's very expensive, too," said the girl. "The newest and most expensive, I've no doubt about that. It's just that these things can go on anywhere. Doesn't seem to make any difference how much you pay." "What things go on?" "You mean cooks pulling out their lashes and hairs and throwing them into the soup just for spite? Now, you do admit, don't you, that a falling eyelash is just about the most purely accidental thing that could happen to anyone? Cooks aren't surgeons, after all. They can't wear eye shields, and even their caps don't come down over their ears. They may wield knives, but they're not exactly engaged in an operation. Granted, there should be hygiene, but you can hardly ask for the hygiene of the operating theatre." The girl laughed. "I certainly know better than to ask for anything like that. Not after some of the things I've heard. I happen to know that a friend of mine was recently eating the most expensive meal of his life when one of those swing doors swung back a few inches further than it was meant to go, and he caught sight of a chef standing over a cooking pan, picking his teeth with a fork." The young man's expression had changed to one of exaggerated politeness. He sat absolutely still, and it seemed that he was concentrating on giving every scrap of his attention to the experiences of this unknown friend. But the young man with the glasses, who had been leaning forward impatiently during the last few minutes, fixing the couple with an insistent and reproachful stare, now managed to snatch this moment of silence for himself. "I suppose you've put your finger on the difference between us," he said, removing the salt and pepper from their stand and setting them against one another in the middle of the tablecloth. "I can well believe that from one hair, or for that matter anything belonging to a person, you might try to conjure up a complete picture of that person. With me, it's different. It's the thing itself that matters. I could give you a clinically exact description of every detail of the actual thing." "Clinical again," exclaimed the girl. "It seems I'm not to escape the word. When I said picking his teeth with a fork, I didn't mean that he simply put it on one side afterwards or plunged it into a sink of boiling water. No. When he'd made a good job of his teeth, he simply used it again for stirring the pot, or whatever it was he had on the stove." "Do you often stir things with a fork, then?" asked the young man at her side. He had not let up in his expression of icy concern for her friend. "I suppose you're now trying to tell me that what my friend described was not a correct description of what he saw?" "Not at all. I'm simply asking a question about cooking. Are things often stirred with a fork rather than a spoon?" "Certain things are," replied the girl, with a cool willingness to enlighten. "Things that have to be kept light, I imagine. Some egg dishes, perhaps, or things with a creamy consistency that have to be whipped as well as stirred." The other young man had put back the pepper and salt in the cruet. He had put on his glasses again and was sitting with folded arms, his face rather flushed. "You two, can't you give it a break?" he said. "What is it now? Recipes! A few minutes ago you were making this terrible fuss over a hair." "It was not a hair," said the girl in green. "If you remember, it was an eyelash. And I made no fuss about it at all, simply remarked on it being there. I'd enjoyed all the rest of the evening, and it simply came as a slight disappointment for some reason." "Disgust was the word you used," said the young man beside her. "And you know, I think the disgust or the disappointment, or whatever it was, came a long, long time before that. Now, I should say the evening disappointed you from the first go-off. Your disappointment, if it wasn't actual disgust, was beginning to show to great advantage when I called for you. You sulked ferociously during the last interval because all the rest of us had enjoyed the play. Oh, but I say, wait a minute, said the other young man, still flushed but smiling tolerantly. I doubt if enjoyment is quite how I would describe. Peculiarly rude to the taximan, went on the other, ignoring him. And when we stopped here, you had long ago decided that you were going to hate the place, the food, the decorations, and the people. I believe, in fact, that you had been looking frantically for this eyelash the whole evening, and now at last you've found it, haven't you? The young man was now fiery-faced. The girl had become rather pale, but all she said was, "Have you finished with your analysis?" "Quite finished." "Then we can go." They both rose at once. There was something acrobatic about this movement, for with one hand the young man removed his chair from under him and swung it lightly back, replacing it again exactly as it had been, only after a slight pause, as though waiting for a certain beat of music, and with the other hand whisked several pound notes from his waistcoat pocket, while the girl managed to leave the table in a half pirouette, balancing on the fingertips of one hand and swinging her jacket off the back of her chair and swirling it across her shoulders with the other arm. Then, with both hands raised and head back, smiling coldly to some distant gallery, she flicked a smooth tail of dark hair from under the collar of her coat. Both wore the detached and utterly absorbed expression of persons engaged in tortuous feats too difficult to explain except to the uninitiated. A waiter who had been standing by the wall now started towards them, shambling a little, as befitting the next performer coming on after a streamlined act. "Hey," called the other young man who had been left sitting at the table, "what about us? We're not ready yet. Maud here hasn't finished her coffee." But the couple were lifting their hands in extravagant farewell. They were passing tables, the man with his fiery face and the pale girl, from which people glanced up momentarily and flinched, still munching, from the inexplicable wave of heat and ice passing over them. The blonde girl, who had heard her own name spoken for the first time in 2 hours, brightened up a little. She stretched out her hand and placed it on the 2 crumpled napkins lying in the middle of the table, and examined from a distance her silvery lilac fingernails. "Well, what was all that about?" she said, languidly drooping her neck towards the empty chairs. "I have quite simply, absolutely no idea whatsoever," said the young man, still staring over her shoulder at the door. "Because I don't believe in letting one person spoil the whole evening," said the girl, and added, "as she did over that eyelash." The young man made no reply. "Do you suppose he was right?" she went on. "About what?" "About fair girls being gay and friendly." Her own lashes were navy blue and very long. In spite of them, she seemed to be seeing the young man with a deadly and increasing accuracy. "I have, quite simply, absolutely no idea whatsoever," said the young man.